And welcome. This is Peter Winick, and welcome to Leveraging Thought Leadership with me, Peter Winick, the CEO, founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. And today, my guest is my good friend Pete Weissman from Thought Leader Communications. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you, Peter. Great to be with you.
Great. And let me give everybody Pete's official introduction because it's actually really interesting. So, Pete Weissman's an award-winning speechwriter. He's a speaker, and he's a communications director. For the past 20 years, he supported leaders in the White House, the U.S. Senate, and Fortune 100 companies. He runs a interesting firm down in Atlanta called Thought Leader Communications, and that firm provides speechwriting, thought leadership, and strategic counsel to companies, foundations, and associations. And Pete specializes in helping senior execs become recognized as thought leaders in their field. And he studied journalism at Washington and Lee. He was born in South Florida, and of course, he was a high school speech and debate champ. So I'm not going to attempt to arm wrestle him verbally today, although maybe I might. And spent 3 years in the West Wing of the White House, not the show, but the actual White House. Worked in the Senate, and then moved to Atlanta to work with the chairman and CEO of Coca-Cola. So welcome aboard.
Thank you, Peter.
Great. So, full disclosure, we have worked together, right? And we have been friends we were just talking actually, almost 5 years. So
That's right. Hard to believe.
I think I know you longer than you know your children, and you know me longer than I know my wife. So.
We do go back.
Yeah.
We do go back.
And one of the cool things about our relationship is we've moved from sort of client consultant relationship to things that I love to do is we've actually collaborated with other clients, bringing both of our skills to the table, and that's always been fun. That's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, actually. Those have been some fantastic projects with book authors, CEOs, folks who really stepped up their profile and influence. Always great to work with you.
Great, thank you. So why don't we start with, again, this is about leveraging thought leadership and how you scale your business and all that. You're a great example and case study of that. So could you give us a little sense of sort of Pete World circa 2013, and then maybe slowly take us through the transformation or evolution to where we are today at 2018?
Sure. So after I left the Coca-Cola company when the chairman and CEO retired, I hung up my own shingle, and I was Pete Weissman Communications, and I was a speechwriter for hire. And I was really fortunate through a lot of recommendations and referrals to get hired to write speeches for executives and authors, folks who had some type of high stakes presentation that they needed to bring in some outside help for. And that was going along fine, but there were a few things going on that made me want to really pivot my business.
Mm-hmm.
One, the type of help that I wanted to provide people was much more strategic. And with a single speech, kind of a one-off speech that I assist someone with, I really can't help them. I can help them win the night and win the conference, but I really can't help them achieve some of their bigger long-term goals. Many of them are change agents in their field, and they need help articulating that at larger and larger conferences and forms of media over a couple years. So I knew that if I just stayed,
but Pete, let me just interrupt you for a second. But that's not a weakness of yours. It's a function of the business model, right? So if you're retained to hire somebody to write a speech, by definition, that's a somewhat transactional relationship.
Exactly. It was often one and done, and they were a lot of fun, and they were very lucrative.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with some incredible people who remain clients today. But the business model was really structured as, okay, what's your speech? Here are my writing samples. Here's the price.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do the interview. I'll give you the draft, and we're kind of done. And, if you have something else in 6 months or a year, I'd love for you to come back to me. So that was a fine business model for what it was. And there are plenty of people who make a good living doing just that. But I had bigger aspirations to be able to serve people with a deeper and longer relationship. I can do a lot more over the course of several speeches, and I can actually help you figure out where you should be speaking and what action steps you should take to garner more media interest or more industry attention. So there's a lot more that I could offer, and I wanted these deeper, longer relationships. And thought leadership was really the space that I wanted to work in. And just a little bit of background, throughout my time working in Washington, D.C. and in the news media and in politics, I saw that there were certain people who were just the go-to experts of their field. They were the ones that reporters went to. Right. They were the ones that politicians wanted to stand next to. And I was fascinated by how they did this. So I spent about a decade studying them and kind of reverse engineering. And I came up with a model of what they were doing that was different than other leaders who might have been just as smart and doing work that was just important. But I realized that there are certain things you can do in a certain order to really raise your profile, your influence, and your impact. And that became the larger offering that I wanted to bring people.
So let me sort of unpack that a little bit. Old model is you write the speech and you're doing it. I mean, you're somewhat humble at the highest levels of a typical speechwriter. You're working with CEOs of Fortune 500s, hundreds, leaders in government. I mean, you're not chugging it out at the local chapter of the Chamber of Commerce or something. So you're sort of top of your game there. But even there, you're going at it going, not necessarily as satisfying as I would like. So you had to expand the way that you approach the market so that you can do all the other things that you wanted to, which were beyond the scope of a speech, this being strategic, this having a methodology, having a process, right? So that was a process. Yeah.
And this was one of the spots where you really helped me. You looked at my whole process, at all the work I did up front, even before I started writing a word about a client's speech or working on an outline or a first draft. And you said, Pete, I'm looking at your model and you're doing all this McKinsey level strategic analysis on the front end. The risks of this audience, who else is going to hear the message, what's going to become the soundbite, all this high level analysis and thinking on the front end, but then you're just selling a speech. And you said in more polite terms, you should flip that and give away the speech, but sell the strategic thinking. And that became the foundation for my new business model. And around this time, I switched the name of my company to Thought Leader Communications, so that one, it was not just about me as one person, because we've become a firm, and it was important that people see us as a firm, but that the focus was on communications for thought leaders, and not just speech writing or one-offs.
Well, I think the other thing you did at that time, if I recall correctly, that was interesting is you put the methodology out there. So one of the things that happened when we worked together is you clearly had a methodology. You weren't just some, winging it sort of guy. You were very methodical. You had a process, you'd refined it, it worked, but nobody saw it. It lived only between your ears. And part of what we came to terms with is let's show the world that you have a methodology about how you go about all this stuff that you do on the front end that isn't necessarily scribing, right? It's not the speech writing part, but without all that, that's what made you special, is that you do all that strategic stuff on the upfront, and then you move to the next step, and then you move to the next step. And once you sort of put that methodology out there and position the firm to not be the Pete show, what changed? Just not just the look and feel, but what fast forward a couple of years and what's different now?
Everything changed. So people came to me with higher level, bigger needs that could be satisfied over a long term, and that required more than just one speech. And it also affected the pricing, because they knew they weren't shopping for a commodity of a single speech of 2,000 or 5,000 words that's going to be delivered on one night and put away. They were now looking for an entire thought leadership campaign with a series of speeches and placement at venues and amplifying it and creating action steps and building coalitions. So I became a source for a much higher level, valuable and impactful offering. And that was transformational. And, Peter, I just wanted to follow up. You mentioned that we put the model online, and folks can see that on my website. It's diagnose, design, and deliver. So I used to do all of that kind of in my head. They weren't aware of all the work that went into it. And now we've actually broken it into 3 discrete steps. And folks will hire me for the diagnose phase, and I'll figure out what they really need. Sometimes they don't even know that they need it. I mean, they think they need a strategy and a speech and a content plan, but it turns out that the executive is perhaps uncomfortable as a speaker, and they also need coaching or media training. So that diagnose allows me to figure out everything it's going to take for them to reach their goals. And at the end of that first phase, we'll issue a report, we'll have a conversation, and they can take the recommendations and run with them on their own. They can use other resources. They can hire us to do all or part of it. But now we've really delineated the value in each phase that we bring them, instead of selling kind of one speech and you're done. So
I love it. And now you've got higher price point, longer term engagement. I think you've also decommoditized or decommodified, whatever, yourself, where if I'm a buyer looking for, my CEO needs a speech, I might look at you and 5 other sites. the way you come across is different than a typical speechwriter of, hey, I'm a speechwriter and here's the 5 CEOs I've worked with and, here's a clip and, rinse, lather, repeat. You're coming at it in a much more consultative way. And I think it serves you well in terms of it's differentiated you from the pack and probably allowed you to win engagements that you might have been in a bake-off or had to compete on price, God forbid, or something along those lines.
That's exactly what used to happen. It doesn't happen anymore. And what's interesting now is I compete with really huge global PR firms, but they don't have the
Mm-hmm.
in-house expertise to deliver what the client wants. And gosh, all of my big clients have major global PR
Sure.
firms on retainer, but they still come to me because of that niche expertise.
And that they're paying a premium for. So that's awesome. That's the transformation. Life is good now, and not that it wasn't good before.
Yeah,
But
life
tell
is
me a
great.
bit, because you've got a bit of an entrepreneurial streak and a bit of a creative streak as well. What are the other things that you're doing to get your name out, get the message out, get the content out? I mean, we talked earlier today, before we got online here, about a masterclass that you just did. So tell me other ways that you're packaging and getting the content out there and what that does for you.
Great. So my economic buyer is someone who works in or runs the communications function of a large organization. It's a company, it's a foundation, it's an association, and they need
Let
to.
me pause you
Yeah,
there for a minute because I'm always delighted when someone could clearly articulate who their buyer is with such precision. Because oftentimes when I'm talking to authors and thought leaders and speakers, I hear things like, oh, so many people could benefit from this, or everybody needs this. But and you're evolved enough in your business and in your thinking to know, geez, 99.9% of the world couldn't care less who you are or what you do. And that's okay. But you focused everything you do on that corporate buyer that you identified really, really nicely.
and it's interesting. And it took a while to figure that out because the person I'm actually serving is usually the CEO, the chairman, the president, the dean. uh, they have the highest role leading the organization. But the person who's calling me, the person who's signing the agreement,
Mm-hmm.
is it's usually an SVP of communications or sometimes a chief marketing officer. Um, they they need to help their boss. And the stakes are very high. The margin
Right.
for error is very small, and they've got to move quickly. And to them, bringing in an expert who specializes in this space is the safest path to be. There's the old saying, probably outdated now, but nobody ever got
Mm-hmm.
fired for hiring IBM. That's kind of the space we're in. If your executive needs to become a thought leader, if your organization needs to drive change in the field, thought leader communication is the specialist firm in that
So you
space.
have two constituencies that you have to satisfy that have very, very different needs, right? So you have the SVP who might be a little risk averse, who's of service to their
Yep,
CEO, who wants to get this done well and also not, mess up in front of their boss or put someone in front of their boss that their boss thinks is suboptimal. That's number one. And then you first have to do a great job for the CEO or the leader.
exactly. I build a lot of trust with that head of communications who is my direct economic buyer. I know what they're going through. I've worked for
Mm-hmm.
them. I've hired outside communications consultants. I've managed them. I know the ways the relationship can go wrong. So they know I'm coming at it, understanding their perspective and what's really important to them. I'm trying to reduce their risk, show them that this is going to be successful. They can feel safe putting me in front of the CEO. And that means I make a number of commitments. Like I'm not going to share something with the
Sure.
CEO that I haven't shared with you first. I'm not going to turn around and criticize you or your leadership when I'm sitting with the CEO. That's not what I was brought there to do. I'm not there to try to take over whoever your internal or external PR department is. I have no interest in general PR work either. So
So
I
let me pause again there. So I want folks to notice the degree that Pete knows his clients, their fears, their needs, their struggles, and then the client meaning the economic buyer, as well as the client being the user in this case. If you can't articulate the pain points, the struggles, the issues, and all of those things that your clients have, you need to stop and figure out how to get as proficient as it in it as Pete is. Right? Empathy, confidence, trust. Do you even know what's going on in their head? Do you even know what you need to do to make them successful? And I find again, a lot of people are so focused on their own content and methodologies and all that other sort of stuff. They're not thinking about the risk profile and the struggles and the issues and all that because it's really risky to bring someone on board to put in front of your boss that doesn't perform well. That's not a fun place to be, particularly in a corporate culture.
And one of the other big entry points that I've identified for my ideal clients is when there's a leadership transition. So a new executive is coming in. There's often a desire to help raise that person's profile, to help them better articulate their vision of change, to make sure, maybe they were the COO or the CFO. Peter,
Exactly.
We've worked with a few of those who moved up to be CEO, right? They need to show competence and an ability to communicate at a much higher level and exercise some different persuasive skills. And that's a natural point where they want to call in kind of an outside expert who knows the best practices across different industries to provide custom support to the CEO. So I also know that leadership transitions, those are folks, when I see a change coming in a company, I'm proactively reaching out with a very personalized email message or LinkedIn note to the head of communications who's about to have a new boss who wants to make this easy and reduce their risk.
So again, kudos to you, because that's the next phase is you've got a pain point that's clearly identified, or a particular point in time where it's more likely that they'll need your services, leadership transition, et cetera. And again, I'd ask everybody else, can you identify the either pain points and or times, whether that's a product launch, whether that's a change in market conditions, to Pete's case, a change in leadership? Do you know what those times are? Because it's not only about you and your content, it's what is it that's going to increase the demand from a client that might be outside of the things that you're looking at. So you're doing things to monitor, ABC Corp or whatever just hired a new CEO. Hey, that's sort of cool. That's a higher probability time frame for you to be able to get into the door. So there's some proactive things you're going to do there. Let me go back a step, Pete. So I can hire you to write a speech. I can hire you to do larger platform development and ongoing work like you talked about. What are the other ways, and I touched on the masterclass, I don't think we got there, other ways that you're deploying your expertise, your knowledge, your content to the world?
Sure. So you can bring me in if you're a company and you're having your communications retreat or your annual retreat or a function or meeting for your high performers. You can bring me in to teach them either better communication skills, things like how to write a soundbite, how to be a better presenter, or how to think and communicate like a thought leader. And as a matter of fact, we're going to be doing a program with a Fortune 50 company later this year where they're bringing in not just the communications team and some of the PR experts, but business unit heads so that they begin to think in the context of communicating at a higher level as thought leaders. But I'll go back to the masterclass. So I have had a lot of luck speaking at communications conferences, especially in executive communications and speech writing, because those are my peers, first of all, and many of my friends. And I've been doing this for about 15 years, starting with speech writing conferences in DC. But those are the people who know when their boss or their CEO needs to perform at a higher level. They need better ideas to share. They need to communicate it more effectively. So I speak at conferences to teach them some of the things that I teach my clients, with the hope that they will one day, when they have that need, think of me to bring me in. And that has really evolved over the years. I used to give kind of, free speeches, as many of your clients and the folks you're interviewing do, because you just want to get in front of the right people. And that has evolved to giving paid pre-conference sessions at communications conferences. So now we've got a group of people who've paid extra just to get this focused attention on my area of specialty, thought leadership communications. What's nice about the pre-conference is it's a self-selected group. These people really have an interest in it and they have a need for it. But because it's at the beginning of the conference, I'm going to be there another day or two. I have time to talk with them, meet with them, figure out follow-up plans. So I've spoken in Montreal, in DC, in other places at these pre-conferences. And one of the nice things about it is I don't need to fill the room. People are already there.
I love it. So let me unpack some of the wisdom in that. So again, highly targeted, right? You're not going to accept every invitation, right? You've moved it from free to paid, although you probably would still do some free events if it was in a target-rich environment, I imagine. And you're not making the mistake of doing what I would call a drive-by. You come in, you do your hour or 2 hour slot, and then boom, you're gone. You're carving out the time in your schedule to be there, so that if it's a 2-day event and you went on Monday morning and I saw you and I'm intrigued, now it's lunch that afternoon or the cocktail party that evening, and there's the dude I saw up there that was pretty smart. I want to go talk to him, as opposed to he just flew off to the next thing, right? So you're making yourself available, and the
Right.
conversation that you're starting with those people, I'm imagining, is pretty rich because they already know who you are, what you're about, and unless you did something silly on stage, you've proved that you've got the goods, right? You've got the expertise just by being invited to that event and being able to get up and articulate what you do and how you do and all that other sort of stuff.
So I'm gonna use one of my tools here, which I call Show Your 3.0, which is when you're trying to articulate a thought leading vision,
Mm-hmm.
you start with the 1.0, how it was done in the past, what the old model was, why it made sense. Then you switch to 2.0, which is present day. This is the
Mm-hmm.
current way it's done. Maybe it's how retail operates or how healthcare functions. And then you say why today's model no longer fits, is becoming less sustainable with each passing day. And that's why we need version 3.0. And there you lay out your vision of the future and how it needs to be structured, why it needs to be changed, and why it will be better. So just to apply that to the recap you shared, 1.0 was I gave free speeches to a target audience. Then I started giving paid speeches to an even more focused and targeted audience. Now I'm kind of in 3.0, and on March 1st, I held a master class here in Atlanta, and we had 16 people fly in from 8 states to spend a day with me on the what, why, and how thought leadership. And this was an impressive group. We had industries, pharma, petroleum, retail, healthcare. We had 3 universities, including a top 30. We had insurance. We had a government agency. We had an education foundation. We had, let's see, a medical association, and we had 3 Fortune
Wow.
200 companies represented and 3 Fortune 100 companies represented, all of whom, this was not piggybacking on someone else's conference. This was come to Atlanta for the Thought Leadership Launchpad. And the way I put that together was I partnered with a peer who has an incredible network among the Executive Communications Committee. And we put this program together, and then he reached out to his network, and that yielded a large number of people flying in to take this course.
Mm-hmm.
But my goal with this was to be the opposite of transactional. My goal was to build a community. So before they ever came to Atlanta, I did a half-hour call with every attendee, so 16
Right.
people, to understand why they were coming, what they wanted to get out of it. And that allowed me to begin to build a relationship with them, but also to
Right.
customize the presentation. So we'd come to a certain slide, and it's the problem that Joe mentioned, and I've got his quote or his comment on the board. One of the fellows from a university who was trying to reposition the university's reputation said, we've about PR'd our way through this as far as we can. Now we need to do something else. And that something else, we both chuckled, was thought leadership. So people saw their own quotes, their own names, their own challenges throughout the deck. It felt really relevant to them. When
Right.
they came to Atlanta, we had a cocktail party the night before. Everyone, made name tags for everyone. We did a dinner the night before. And then afterwards, I did a free phone call 1 week later. Ask Pete anything. Anyone who wants to jump in and ask a question, you're stuck, you're trying to explain.
Was that with the group, or they can call you individually?
That was the group. That was the
Okay,
group.
so the group reconvened. So you basically sort of tried to capture that essence of community that you always get when you're in person, and
Yep.
let's all huddle. And you probably use some sort of web-based something, whatever, and they can not only ask you questions but bounce off of each other, and you keep that sense of connectedness. That's brilliant. So very,
Exactly.
very
We're
well
gonna
done.
do we're gonna do another one 3 weeks after,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, 3 weeks after. And there are other ways folks could take this. You create a private Facebook group, you could create a LinkedIn group, you could use a lot of web-based tools. But for me, I'm going to be doing this for 20 or 30 years. These people have already invested time in
Right.
me. I want
Right.
to invest in their success, and they may not need anything now, although several of them were working on proposals and contracts, which I'm excited about. But I want to be a resource that they can turn to as they change jobs, when they go elsewhere.
And you want to keep engaged and in contact with them, not just for the short term, because that's the other thing I would observe is you've always been thoughtful about playing a long game, right? So hey, if you don't get pick up an engagement right now, just statistically that 3 years from now one of those people will move to another company and have a new CEO, and it will all pay dividends at some point.
It's a long game, Peter.
Yeah. So let me ask you as we start to wrap up, um, give yourself some advice, meaning talk to Pete 10 or 15 years ago. What would you tell, not that you're not young, but younger Pete Weissman to do today? So someone out there that's sort of first coming into the game. They're smart, they're talented, they're qualified, but they're struggling maybe a little bit with the business side of this whole thought leadership world. What would you tell them to do less of or more of?
Well, a couple things. Defining yourself is in the beginning is really hard, but it's so important. If you hang up your shingle as kind of a jack of all trades, um, you're really going to have trouble connecting with the target clients you need to
Got
reach,
it.
and so figure out the space that you want to be in. I would say be industry neutral. So a lot of people, used to work just serving travel agents. I think that business has probably gone away, or just selling ads in the yellow pages.
Yeah,
Um,
for those of you under 40, Google travel agent.
or
Yeah,
yellow
or
pages.
yellow pages for that matter, right?
I can work, people say, well, do you specialize in, a certain industry? No, I want to work across
Mm-hmm.
every industry, because there's change in every industry. There are folks I can help everywhere. Um, I would say think about not maintaining, jobs or gigs, but building a relationship for life. So I have clients who have changed jobs 2 and 3 times, and I'm there to help them and cheer them on and support them. And you know, they do the same for me, and that's a relationship. And sometimes I can help them when
Mm-hmm.
they land a big corporate gig, and sometimes I can't. But that relationship will endure no matter what happens, and that's incredibly satisfying. And so you go to a conference, don't look at it as, how many calls can I schedule, or think about the long game.
That's fantastic. Well, I am so glad to have had you on today and to share some of your successes, because it's been an amazing transformation that I've been privy to be a part of in some small way over time, and watch your work unfold and the business evolve and the cool projects that you're working on, and the fact that we get to do a couple of projects together here and there is always fun. But how do people find you? Do they just show up at your door late at night with a snack, or what's the best way to find you?
Best way to find me is my website, which is thoughtleadercommunications.com.
Well, thanks again. And I would recommend that people reach out to Pete if you are one of the folks that are, he's identified very nicely that he can help or be targeted. And if not, he'd actually probably take your call anyway if he could be helpful. So
I still
thanks
would.
so
I
much.
still would. Thanks so much, Peter.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.